So hello and welcome. We're really glad that you could join us for this Ash Dieback talk, and it's great to see so many of you here today. I'm Eleanor and I work for the Woodland Trust in the Southwest. Today's talk on Ash Dieback in Devon is the second in a trio of tree-themed talks that the Woodland Trust are running on behalf of the Devon Local Nature Partnership. Last week, we focused on expanding Devon's woodland cover, and on Monday, the 5th of October, we're talking about the importance of ancient woodland and how it can be carefully restored. So if you're interested, details can be found on the Woodland Trust website. The Woodland Trust are running today's talk on behalf of the Devon Local Nature Partnership, which has had a focus on woods and trees for some years. But the welcome surge in interest in kind of tree planting in response to the climate emergency and the threats posed to our treescapes through diseases such as Ash Dieback has really brought this topic to the top of the agenda and has resulted in the development of a cross-sector Trees for Devon group to drive this work forward. Before I introduce today's speakers, I've just got a couple of bits of housekeeping. So we are going to record the talk today, so anyone who isn't able to attend in person can catch up at a later date. If you don't want to be visible on the recording, then please can you turn off your video? This can be done by clicking the video button on the control bar at the bottom of your screen. If you don't want to be identifiable at all, then please feel free to rename yourself. This can be done by hovering over the video of your face and clicking on the three dots in the top right-hand corner and clicking rename. Due to the kind of limited amount of time and the number of attendees, all guests will be muted throughout. But there's plenty of opportunity to engage and ask questions via the chat box. So the chat box can be found at the bottom of your screen. I will be checking it throughout. So if you have any technical issues, you can send me a private message and I'll see what I can do to help. I will also be popping any key links that the speakers mention in there. So if you want to know more, that's the place to check. The talk is going to last approximately 45 minutes, so there'll be plenty of time for questions. So if anything occurs to you throughout the talk, just pop it in the chat box and we will answer as many as possible at the end. So in the next hour, we're going to hear from Rob Wolton from the Devon Ash Dieback Forum and Rosie Cotgreave from Saving Devon's Treescape project. But before I hand over, we have a quick question for you all. So a poll should have launched on your screens asking if you think you've seen Ash Dieback in Devon. So if you could answer that, we would really appreciate it. I will just give a couple more seconds for everyone's answers to come in, but it's looking quite unanimous my end. So I'm just going to end that and share with you the fact that 100% of you, so everyone on this call, thinks that they have spotted Ash Dieback in Devon. So that obviously kind of highlights why the work of the Devon Ash Dieback Forum and the Saving Devon's Treescape project are so important. So without further ado, I am going to hand over to our first speaker, which is Rob.
Thank you very much. Now, my internet connection is not very good. So for that reason, Rosie is actually uploading the slides from her desktop and I'm asking her to change them. Also for that reason, I'm going to very shortly take myself off video so that you can hear me clearly, at least, even if you can't see me. I hope that's all right by everybody. Now, well, I'll do that now, actually. Stop video. There we are. So, yes, I'm very pleased that you're all able to join us this afternoon. And what I'm going to talk about over the next 20 minutes or so is about how to the impact that ash dieback is going to have on our landscapes and treescapes of Devon, about how to recognise ash dieback, although I think you're all pretty familiar with that, judging by the poll, but if you'll bear with me, I'll go through that quickly, it might be helpful. About what to do if you have an ash tree that is infected on your land, of which you're responsible. And then finally, about what it is that we can do to keep Devon's treescapes and landscapes looking wonderful as they do at the present. There's all sorts of positive good things we can do. And Rosie is going to build on that in her presentation, which will follow on saving Devon's treescapes. So Rosie, if I could ask for the next slide, please. We always thought when this disease first arrived in the county, and we're aware of it, that it was going to have a big effect on our landscapes. And I'm afraid nothing has changed our minds in that respect. It still looks like we're going to lose 90% or more of our ash trees over the next few years. Now, we can't stop the disease, but there is a lot we can do to minimize the impact. Nevertheless, the impact is going to be large. We think that we have 6 times as many ash trees as we ever had elm. And so we don't know that for sure, but almost certainly the impact of ash dieback is going to be a great deal worse than the impact of Dutch elm disease. Next slide. So one of the points I'd like to make is that the impact of this disease is going to be greatest, without a doubt, outside woodlands. It's here that it's going to become most obvious, because after all, it is our second commonest tree outside woodlands in the county. And if you just think about our roadsides, there's nearly 500,000 mature trees alongside our roads alone. It's also a frequent tree in our gardens, in our cities, in our towns, in our villages. And it's these trees which won't just replace themselves with other species that we really need to be worried about. Next slide, please. Whereas in our woodlands, and I'm talking here mainly about our semi-natural woodlands with native tree species, the impact is probably going to be less severe. We're fortunate in the county that although we have an awful lot of ash trees, only very few of our woodlands actually are pure ash, just a very few. And we actually have very few pure ash stands in our woodlands. I mean, there are some, particularly on the calcareous soils. And in our, I'll come back to this a little bit later on, but in our native woodlands, they are largely, if we let nature take its course, they will largely look after themselves. However, plantations are being badly affected. And it's soul destroying, I know, for the many landowners who planted up new woodlands, I don't know, over the last decade or two, and included a lot of ash, because ash is, after all, a very good timber tree, and it's also one of those species that is one of the very few species that is resistant to grey squirrel attack. And for these people to see, as we see in this photograph here, all their young ash trees dying is absolutely devastating. And some remedial work will be needed here. So the impact is going to be big. I'm now just going to come on to tell you a little bit about the disease. Rosie, next slide, please. It's, as I'm sure you all know, it's a fungus, and it came to us from Eastern Asia, from China, and it's believed to have arrived in Europe in the early 1990s, and probably it came into Great Britain soon afterwards, although it wasn't actually recognized here until 2012. But looking at some of the trees which have been felled in East Anglia and the southeast, where the disease first arrived, and looking at the growth rings there, it's clear that the disease was present earlier than that, and probably, as I say, in the late 1990s. and it's sort of increased exponentially ever since then. In terms of terminology, it used to be called Cholera. The fungus was called Cholera, and everyone used to talk about Cholera. And then the taxonomists got hold of it and decided, no, it's Hymenoscyphus fraxineus, which rolls off the tongue a treat, doesn't it? Which is why everybody now just calls it ash dieback, and I will do the same. So how to recognize a disease? Next slide, please, Rosie. It is appropriately named because this is what you see, isn't it? You've all seen this. The trees just die back from the top. But before they do that, next slide, please. What we see is the tree, the canopies start to thin out, and you characteristically get this clumpy look where the leaves, the foliage forms these clumps. That's a good sign to look out for. But next slide, please. Here, I think this is the best thing to look out for. It's on the small stems, on the twigs. You can see these pinkish brown stains occurring along them, which are very obvious. And this is where an infected leaf has introduced the fungus into the stem, and the fungus has sealed off the vessels which control the flow of water and sap, and as a result, the stem above is dying. Now, you'll find, if you haven't already seen them, that these pinkish brown lesions are very obvious. What else to look out for? Next slide, please. So here we see some diamond-shaped lesions. If you look at the guidance that's online, a lot of the advice, it says look out for these diamond-shaped lesions, which occur on larger stems where branches enter. Now, in my experience, these are really quite difficult to find, and you don't often see them. So I wouldn't spend a lot of time myself looking for them, or if you do find them, it is a good sign of ash dieback. Next slide, please. But beware, ash is very prone to all sorts of cankers and splits and cracks, as you see in these photographs. And these are not a sign of ash dieback, although they may be weakening the tree and making it more susceptible to it. Next slide. And here, again, the books, or rather the online guidance, tells you to look out for clumps of dead leaves. Well, first of all, in my experience, actually, they're remarkably difficult to see, even though this disease is now prevalent over nearly the whole county, and nearly every tree I see is affected to some extent. Actually, these dead leaves are not common. I think what happens is that after the twigs become infected, the leaves drop very rapidly, and you just don't see this all that much. Next slide, please. So just a little bit about the life cycle of this fungus. It's, as I say, it's in the leaves as well as then going into the stems and the trunk. But what happens is that the leaves fall to the ground, and the fungus very cleverly stops the leaf stem, the rachis, from rotting. It scleroterizes it, if I can say it. I always get difficulty getting my tongue around that. But it hardens off the outside of the twig, or rather this leaf stem, and means that it doesn't rot. And so the stem remains on the ground right until the following summer. And that's when it produces lots of tiny little toadstools, as you see here. And these in turn produce millions upon millions of spores. And they are distributed by the wind and infect leaves, and the disease cycle is started once more. A tree responds to the disease by sealing off the infected areas. So the areas above die, but the tree remains healthy underneath. The degree to which different individuals can do that varies considerably. I'll come back to that in a moment. Next slide, please. But although, as I say, the main route of entry for this fungus is through the leaves, evidence suggests it can also enter the ash tree through the roots and also through the stomata or pores in the stem, particularly at the base of the trunk, which is where obviously, because the spores are coming out of the fallen leaves, there's a very high loading of spores. You can spot this, particularly in young trees, as a discoloration at the base of the tree. And when the tree is cut down, you see these characteristic dark brown wedge-shaped marks. Now, it has to be said that in this instance, the term ash dieback is not all that accurate. It should be ash die up, because the tree is actually dying from its base. And it's trees like this, particularly when they're big trees that are infected from the bottom first, that not only is it very difficult to detect the disease, but the trees become unstable and dangerous quickly before you're aware of the problem. Next slide, please. Now, unlike Dutch elm disease, for example, where the trees tended to get the disease and then the mature individuals die rapidly, with ash dieback, it is very erratic. So some trees, die literally within a year or two of getting the disease. That's even mature trees. Other ones last much longer, many years. And it's made even more difficult because some trees that appear badly infected next year can seem to make a remarkable recovery. And new leaves appear all over them. And you think, well, what's all the fuss about? And initially, in the early stages of this disease, people got very excited about that. But sadly, it then transpired that within, a few years of that apparent recovery, the reinfection cycle started and the trees, which had been weakened, then succumb rapidly. So I'm afraid it's not the glimmer of hope we hoped for. Next slide. And this just gives an example of a year's difference. So the tree, it's the same tree here. On the left-hand side, you see it after, it's obviously infected because the crown is thinning. But the following year, just one year, it had lost most of the crown, a lot of dead twigs. And I didn't see this tree the following year, but I should imagine by then it was dead. Next slide. If the tree is already stressed, so for example, it's not enough getting enough water, or is affected by another pathogen, in particular by honey fungus, is likely to die quicker. And such stressed trees are often the first ones to go. So that takes you through the disease and how to detect it. I now want to come on to what to do once you have detected a tree for which you're responsible and what you should do. Just cover that very briefly. Thank you, Rosie. So the first point I'd like to make is that the best advice at the moment is that once your tree has lost about between 25 and 50% of its canopy, and if it's in a high-risk situation, but only if it's in a high-risk situation, so I'm talking about here if it's overhanging a building, or it's next to a road, or cables are running through it, that sort of thing, then is the time to think about felling it. Don't wait until the disease is far advanced. That's because the tree develops, as the tree surgeons talk about it, a high risk of structural failure early on. That means basically it's going to fall over or big branches are going to drop on your head. And it's for that reason, it's one of those trees that's often called a widowmaker. So best to take action early rather than late. If you wait and the tree becomes unsafe, then it's going to be an expensive option to take it down. Next slide, please. However, and this is really important, please, if you do find an affected tree and it's in a low risk situation, as most of our trees will be, then please just leave them alone if you possibly can. And that's for two reasons. First of all, they may be one of the rare survivors, one of the trees that's highly resistant to this disease. And it's, you know, the future of our ash trees going to depend upon these survivors. Ash is not going to go extinct, but the more of these resistant trees we can allow to survive and produce copious quantities of seed, and so that evolution and natural selection can act to produce future generations of disease-free trees, the better. But the second reason why we should leave these trees, and next slide please, is that they are incredibly important, and I'm sure you all know this, incredibly important for a whole lot of creatures that are dependent upon dead and decaying wood. So on the left here we see a wonderful veteran tree in Devon, actually in Wooden Deer Park, which is on Dartmoor. And you know, trees like that are just so important for wildlife. They contain lots of fungi, as we see in the middle, but also lots of specialized invertebrates. And here is a comb-horn cranefly, magnificent beasts. Their larvae, big maggots really, they live on decaying wood in rot holes. And I found them quite frequently in this county, and they have a predilection for ash. So although you very rarely see the adults, the chances are if you've got a good ash rot hole, it's got these comb-horn craneflies in it. Next slide, please. So yes, this brings me on to what we can do then in response to this disease. So we can't stop it, but there are things we can do to keep our landscapes looking wonderful. And the first thing, please ask you to do, and I know Rosie will agree with me on this, is to record any special ash trees you know about now. So when you're walking or about, or if you know of any special ash trees, maybe something that's really important in your community or parish, then please do take a photograph of it. And please do let the Devon Biodiversity Record Centre know about it. We don't want to be in the position where we are at the moment with Dutch elm disease, where we really have scarcely a record of what the county was like before that disease hit. We can do much better, I'm sure, for ash. Next slide. But above all, what we need to do is to encourage new trees. Now, I use the word encourage rather than plant for a good reason, but I'll come back to that in a moment. The reasons for wanting more trees are pretty obvious, really. At least the first one is we want to replace all those millions of ash trees we're losing. The second one, perhaps a little bit less obvious, but that is because we want to try and increase the resilience of our treescapes. By that I mean we want to try and make sure they're more resistant to sudden or big shocks, such as climate change and such as the introduction of further pests and diseases. And believe me, there are reams, there are hosts of new diseases and pests which are either here or about to come here or may come here if the worst happens. And we need to guard against that. And what we can do in particular to guard against it is, when we're encouraging new trees, is to encourage a wide range of different species and different species of native trees, please. There's no reason for us to plant exotics because we have a very good range of native trees and shrubs already here, and they tend to be genetically very variable, and the research suggests that they're more than capable of actually responding and adapting to big changes if we just give them a chance. Only in our towns and cities and other built up areas is it probably appropriate to consider non-native species. And in those circumstances it may be fine, but generally please native. And also, if you can, please very much favour locally sourced and grown trees, because they are the ones grown from local seed and propagated locally that will be best adapted to the native wildlife as well as to the environment, both now and in the future. Next slide. And, you know, if you are planting trees, and we will have to plant many, many trees, absolutely right that we should do, but please, please, can you adopt this 3-2-1 principle? We're really pushing that hard in Devon. And it's very simple. Basically, for every large tree that's lost, plant at least 3 new trees. For every medium-sized one, 2 new trees, and for small ones, 1 new tree. So please, can you please adopt and press others to follow that principle? Next slide. Now, I talked about why I use the term encourage rather than plant, and that is because often the best way of getting more trees is actually to let nature do the job for us. In woodlands in particular, natural regeneration, allowing trees to seed themselves, will often be the best way of getting trees to grow into the gaps left by dead and dying ash trees. Here in woodlands, provided there is adequate protection from deer and other browsing animals, including livestock, nature is often the best option. And coming on to hedges now, it's true here too, that actually, if you can find existing saplings or shoots or stems in hedges, identify them, mark them, and allow them grow on to maturity, that's nearly always the best way of getting new standard trees in our hedgerows. Planting into hedgerows is actually rather difficult because of the intense competition for nutrient and for light. And nearly all our hedgerows have trees just waiting there, ready to come through, if only we give them a chance. Next slide. So, but planting, as I say, planting is often going to be the right thing to do. And please remember the golden rules here. And it sounds blindingly obvious, I know, but this is right tree, right place, right way, right aftercare. But so often actually, these basic rules are not followed. And in particular, the last one, right aftercare. Often the easiest thing is planting a tree. Actually making sure that tree is well established and growing to maturity is the time-consuming part. And you may well have to take good care of a tree for 5 years or more to ensure successful establishment. Now, thank you all very much for listening to me. I'm just about coming to the end here. That's the penultimate slide here. Just to make the point, although this disease is going to have a really big impact on our landscape, and it's incredibly unfortunate that it's arrived, there's still an awful lot we can do to keep Devon's landscapes looking absolutely wonderful as they do at the present time. I've been through some of those, and Rosie will be through more of them. So there is, it's a positive message here, and it's not all gloom and doom by any means. And my last slide. So I'd just like to thank you very much for listening. Very much looking forward to hearing your questions after Rosie has given her presentation, and to say that there is a lot of information you can find on what I've been talking about, in particular on the Devon Ash Dieback Resilience Forum website, and the link is given there, but also I think in the chat room, and also on the Forestry Commission site. They've got some very good guidance too. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rob. I will start mine now. So I am Rosie Cotgreave. I am the Saving Devon's Treescapes project leader. So I'm just going to talk to you about this new project that started in March of this year. So the project is being led by Devon Wildlife Trust on behalf of the Devon Ash Dieback Resilience Forum. It's got many funders and many partners, including the National Lottery Heritage Fund, One Tree Planted, and Tesco Bags of Help. I won't go through every single partner, but hopefully you can see them on the slide in front of you. There's a whole range of them from across Devon. So we've got the AOMBs, different councils, as well as the Woodland Trust and Forestry Commission. They're all inputting in different and varying ways, but all have incredibly crucial and important roles in the success of this project. Just logistically about the project, National Lottery Heritage Fund run the projects in 2 phases. So they have a development phase and a delivery phase. So we are currently in the development phase at the moment, which will run up until the end of May of next year, so May 2021. But we'll then apply for funding again, and hopefully we'll get funding for a further 4 years. So hopefully Saving Devon's Treescapes will be a 5-year project, so it can have some hopefully long-term change across Devon. So the project runs across the whole of Devon, although we do have 5 focus areas, and these areas will have about 50% of the project resource into them. They are the South Devon area down at the bottom, where it currently says Marlborough, but we have named it South Devon, the Torbay area, Exeter and Cranbrook, Collie Valleys and Norwich, which also passes into Somerset as well. So over the 5 years, across the whole of Devon, the project will aim to plant and nurture 250,000 trees outside of woodlands. So as Rob was talking, a lot of the ash trees at the moment are outside of woodlands. So to put 250,000 trees in the ground or to nurture current ones, we're looking for a lot of small locations across Devon to make up that. The project has come about due to ash dieback and the imminent threats that is facing our landscape, but the project is also looking at Devon's treescapes as a whole and hoping to just improve Devon's treescapes for the better moving forward. So ash dieback is everyone's problem, but everyone can be part of the solution. So the biggest part of saving Devon's treescape is that there is a role for everyone in Devon to play. As Pete's in the picture, as Rob has said, we are advocating for the 3-2-1 ash replacement formula. So for every large ash tree that is taken down, we want at least 3 in its place, 2 for a medium and 1 for a small. So this again doesn't mean that exactly where the ash tree has come down is where new ones need to be planted. It's a good principle to follow to ensure that we're getting enough new trees in the ground to replace what is coming down. So obviously a big part of the Saving Devon's Treescape project is planting of new trees, and there's many different ways that we are going about it. So we have our free tree scheme, and this is mainly focused at community groups and individuals. Literally where people can pick up a tree and go and plant it in their plant it in their back garden. So it can be anything from 1 tree up to 10, depending on the size of someone's garden or communal space, so they have permission. Originally these were meant to be given out at the Devon County Show and lots of rural and local shows across the county, but obviously that hasn't happened this year. So instead we have lots of community hubs set up across Devon. So that's where a community group has taken on the role of distributing these trees within their local area. I'm just finalising the final dates and locations for all of these, but they'll be at garden centres, community centres, schools, lots of central places, so people can just show up, pick up a tree, get some information from the volunteers that are there about planting and location of planting, following the right tree, right place principle. And we can start just getting more trees in the ground, hopefully over autumn and winter this year. We've got lots of work with schools as well. So we are working with schools to do plantings if they have land that is suitable on their site. We're also going to be hopefully setting up some micro nurseries with them so that the children can collect seed, again, if possible, from the school itself, and plant and grow that, and then for future year groups can then plant them out on site as well. So that will also give a nice educational element of this, the circle of life of a tree, and taking it from seed all the way into full grown tree. So Flag Southwest are also one of our partners on the project, and they are offering free advisory visits to landowners and farmers. So that is having a particular focus again on hedgerows and the importance of hedgerows, nurturing current hedgerows, restoring them, as well as planting new ones, hedgerow tree tagging, hedgerow tree planting, so all of those important things that Rob mentioned beforehand, as well as looking at small woodlands. So the largest planting that we'll be doing on this project is around 500 trees. So we've been looking for locations for that, and generally just engaging landowners and farmers on the management of ash dieback, the importance of replanting, and again, as Rob was mentioning, just what to do in the different circumstances. So whether it needs to come down, whether it's better left staying there. As part of the project, Forest Southwest are able to offer all of that advice for free. And we're currently booking in those visits at the moment, if anyone knows of any. And then finally, with businesses and other organisations as well, again, we're trying to get as many organisations and businesses across Devon to sign up to the 3-2-1 principle of ash replacement, because many of the ash trees, as Rob said, are dotted about and not necessarily in large woodlands or large areas, but they're just in our everyday lives, really. They're in the hedgerows when you walk down a lane. They're often in urban areas as well. So the more businesses we can engage in that, and the more accountability and responsibility we can have. And if businesses are signed up to the 3-2-1 formula, and then hopefully that will get more trees planted in the ground as well, with more businesses taking ownership of those trees and making sure that they live long and happy lives. So there, yeah, obviously one of the main parts of the project is planting trees. There's many different ways that can be done, but there are also other ways people can get involved in the project. So we have also just set up a community tree nursery, which is at the Devon Wildlife Trust Nature Reserve in Meath. It's an old quarry, old clay shed, and as you can see from the pictures, we've built the tree nursery on the top concrete platform, which used to be one of the sheds. Hopefully over the 5 years of the project, we'll be building 3 tree nurseries in that time. The other 2, we are currently looking for locations. We're hoping to have one that is more urban, so probably just outside Exeter, and then possibly one over in East Devon as well, to spread them out across the county. The aim of these tree nurseries is to hopefully grow 5,000 trees annually, which this will then provide the stock for our free tree scheme, and so communities are able to plant the trees in the local areas. We're currently just recruiting for volunteers to take on this. It will be an entirely volunteer-run nursery with my support, and we will very soon be starting seed collection. We've already had to start some, but due to COVID rules, we've put a slight delay on it, but there will be plenty of opportunities for people to get involved. So we'll be doing lots of seed collection across Devon. Again, Rob was mentioning how important locally grown, locally sourced trees are, and that is something that we don't have a lot of at the moment across Devon and in the southwest generally. So we'll be collecting all seeds from within Devon to grow locally. We'll also be looking at focusing in on some local species, such as the Devon white bean, so that we can make that more of what we can plant as part of the project. So there'll be lots of activity here in the coming months, hopefully, and hopefully lots of trees over the coming years as well, which is really exciting to see. It's one of those projects that I've been working behind my desk at home on since March, so it's really exciting to finally see it come to life and for activities to start happening really soon. So another one of our partners is Dieback, who are based in North Devon. They are helping us, or they're leading a lot of different parts of this project. So one of them, the photos there are all taken by a photographer called Rob Wolton. He has been appointed to do an 8-month commission for the project to really capture the changes that we're going to see. So capturing healthy ash trees now, different ash trees with different levels of symptoms from ash dieback, and also just how that progresses over the time, and how that's going to affect our landscapes as well. So he'll also be photographing the felling of the trees and also the replanting, so doing the whole storytelling basically of ash dieback over the coming 8 months, and then that will be part of the Dieback archive, so that we'll have a record of that, because many people say we didn't capture a lot of what the landscape looked like with Dutch elm disease when it happened, and lots of people wouldn't be able to point out an elm tree now So we want to ensure that we're capturing the beauty of the ash trees before we lose them too badly. They'll also be putting on some walks and talks based on ash dieback. So we have a storyteller appointed who has a fantastic story on ash folklore to bring it to life, with a particular focus hopefully on engaging children with that. And then we'll also hopefully be following up those talks with a more informative talk, much like what Rob has done today, into ash dieback and how people can identify it and take action with it. We'll also hopefully, I say hopefully because I'm still working on it, but be able to create some ash mementos as part of this project as well. Again, especially with a focus on children, so that they have a bit of ash that they can take home with them and remember. So if they, when they grow up and ash trees possibly might not be in their landscape anymore, they'll have a bit that they'll always have been a part of the ash dieback and ash trees. Another element is our citizen science part. So we are currently in the development of an app. So as Rob says, just logging and recording ash dieback is really valuable at the moment, and getting as much research into it as possible will be fantastic. So our app you'll be able to use either on your phone or on your desktop. So you can do it while you're out and about on walks, if that's easier, or back home. You'll be able to quickly and easily record trees. So we'll actually be asking you to record any type of tree, any ancient veteran tree, but obviously we have a particular focus on ash trees and the signs that those ash trees are showing of ash dieback. So hopefully that will be ready very soon. Our developer's just finishing the final touches to it, and then I'll be able to advertise it more widely so that people can just go out and do that on their local walks. And then we'll also be looking at some other specific species. So this will help us understand the health of Devon's treescapes, especially if we can continue it over the 5 years of the project. It'll help us build up a really good picture and how these species are adapting to ash dieback and the replanting as well. So a couple of those species will be the Devon Horseshoe Bat and the brown hair-streaked butterfly. Again, we'll be setting up, just in the process of setting up some training sessions to identify the brown hair-streaked butterfly. So hopefully they'll be advertised soon. We'll be focusing in on a few areas. So it's the eggs we'll be looking for over autumn and winter when the trees have shed their leaves, I can't think of the words, so you can see it more clearly. But hopefully we'll have some more information on that soon. So that is a very broad overview of the project. Obviously lots of different ways to get involved. Hopefully there's something in there for everyone. Just a summary of ways that you can help. So we need lots of volunteers, whether that's at our tree nursery, whether it's collecting seed, planting trees. There's lots of different ways for people to be involved in that. Also download, you'll be given a link to the app so that you can continue to log trees across Devon and especially ash dieback. And then there'll also be some training sessions with further other species to help us monitor the health of the treescapes. We'd love you to plant a tree if you have the land available. Then that is a massive way that you can support this project, and you can claim trees through our free tree scheme. And then for larger plantings, we can also discuss with Swag Southwest whether an advisory visit is beneficial as well. And then also we'll be promoting our cultural walks and talks with Eford soon as well, so you can get involved in them. But the most easiest way to get involved is to tell people about the project locally across Devon. The more people that are engaged with the project, the bigger impact we can have. We use the hashtag Save Devon's Trees, so everything around Devon's trees hopefully is captured on that hashtag. So again, even if you're out and about and you see ash dieback, you can just tweet it or put it on Facebook using that hashtag, and we'll see it as part of the project. And it helps us just build a bigger picture of what's happening across Devon and hopefully engage people, because many people sadly aren't aware of what is about to happen and the landscape changes that we're about to see. So the more awareness we can raise, the better hopefully the project will be. But I've just put a link there to our webpage, which I think will be in the chat box as well, which summarises everything I've talked about. Yeah, that is the end of the talk.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Rob and Rosie. That was a really informative talk. It's obviously a devastating disease, but it feels as though there are reasons to be optimistic. So thank you very much. The chat box has been busy, so we're going to go straight into questions. But if you do have any further things that you want to ask, then let us know and we will raise them. So the first question is regarding a natural biological control. So Rob, is there a natural biological control from China that could be used to help combat the disease?
No, the short answer is I'm afraid not. The trees that the native ash to China are adapted and aren't killed by the disease. But for fungi, unfortunately, you know, it's not like insect pests. It's much more difficult to have biological control elements. And I'm afraid, no, I haven't heard of anything such as that, and I doubt there would be anything.
And what about once the timber has been felled? So when you've had to fell an infected ash tree, can it be used for anything? Has it still got kind of utility for firewood or building?
Yes, certainly. It can. You can do what you like. There are no restrictions on the timber or felled wood from infected ash trees, so you can move them around freely, because you can't spread the disease through the wood. The disease is spread through the fallen leaves. And you can certainly use it for firewood. And I believe, you know, there's a bit of a glut of firewood at the moment because of so much dead ash around the place. I have heard that structurally the fungus actually reduces the integrity of the timber. So I wouldn't recommend using it for building or anything unless you hear otherwise. But the staining is quite attractive, and certainly for sculptural pieces, it may have its uses there.
Yeah, no, that as well.
About the structural integrity being compromised. Sorry, Rosie, what were you going to say?
That's fine. I was just saying we are hoping in future years of the project to set up sustainable wood fuel hubs as well. So yeah, definitely can be used as wood fuel.
So watch this space. Excellent. The next question leads on from that really. It was around whether there is a need to remove infected trees once they've been kind of felled in order to prevent other trees from becoming infected.
If I can answer that. Sadly, there's nothing you can do to stop this disease. So there's no point in removing an infected tree, because unless you could remove all the leaves as well, you wouldn't reduce the spore burden. And in any case, the disease is everywhere, and the spore burden is just huge. I gather, you know, that there are just billions and billions of these spores at the right time of the year, floating around the place and blowing in the wind, and we can't stop it. I'm afraid there's nothing we can do, no.
So if at all possible, yeah, leave that wood in situ, because as dead wood, it actually has, you know, a real biodiversity value. A question now about the wildlife that's likely to be kind of most threatened. So Rob, are there specific species that are most likely to be impacted by the disease?
There are. I mean, we're fortunate in a way in that there aren't a great many species that are dependent only upon ash, but there are some. There's a handful of moths, for example, which will become a lot scarier as a result of the disease. There's also one or two lichens. It's a good tree for lichens, but there's one or two lichens that are highly specific to ash trees. And there we will need to be very careful to make sure we don't lose them from the county. When I say careful, I'm not sure actually there's much we can do about it. We'll just have to hope for the best. But the main thing about ash is there's so much of it. And there is a lot of wildlife, you know, that lives on ash, on its bark, on its leaves, you know, eats its keys or what have you. And just the loss of so many trees is inevitably going to have an impact on our wildlife.
Absolutely. Now there is a challenge to the native comments. So I'm going to read kind of the point out for you, and then it'd be great to hear your kind of thoughts on it. So it says, non-native species have a place in planting for future woodlands, for timber, carbon sequestration and biodiversity too. We also need to plan for climate change. Trees which grow happily in certain places now won't be so happy in 60 to 100 years. Britain's relatively small selection of 35 or so natives is due to the fact that sea levels rose at a certain point, and we can't just dismiss a more diverse, resilient species mix. So I was wondering what your thoughts on that were, Rob.
Well, it's a very complicated issue, isn't it? First of all, I think you may well have a point in terms of carbon sequestration. I mean, there may well be a valid argument for planting lots of eucalyptus plantations, because it does, you know, pull carbon out of the air quicker than most other tree species. But that aside, there has actually been quite a lot of research done on this recently, and the Woodland Trust have been involved in this. And I know there is a recent Forestry Commission report on it as well, which has looked specifically into this issue about whether, from the point of view of treescape resilience, we should be planting non-natives or, in particular, trees from more southerly climates. And the answer to that has been pretty clear, is that nearly always it's better actually to use native trees, and native trees that are of a local origin. So in the genetic variation, the intraspecific genetic variation in our trees is actually very large. And because they reproduce so freely, so something like ash, for example, produces, you know, thousands and thousands of seeds every year, that there is actually a huge pool upon which natural selection can work on that genetic variation to produce trees that are actually adapted to future climates and future diseases. And actually pulling in, using trees from more southerly climates carries real risks, first of all, out of seasonally or phenology, in terms of phenology. So for example, they come into leaf before our local wildlife needs those leaves, or blue tits need the cat leaves, that sort of thing. And also that you bring in new pests and diseases when you bring in those trees from more southerly seed sources. It's only where your primary aim may be timber production and you're prepared to take a risk that there may be some case for bringing in trees from a more southerly climate, because they may grow faster, but it is a risk, and certainly from a nature conservation point of view, it's not necessary and could be damaging.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I would just echo that from a kind of Woodland Trust perspective. There is certainly a role for kind of non-native species, and you listed some of the examples with kind of timber production, but also potentially urban spaces. But as Rob mentioned, the Woodland Trust has been involved in some research into how species kind of adapt to climate change, and resilience is obviously and diversity are key. But the research has found that if you are managing for biodiversity, then even in kind of changing climate scenarios, native species do have kind of sufficient resilience to adapt and are still best to kind of support the widest range of wildlife. But if anyone would like any more information about that, then let me know and I can point them in the direction of that research. So one more question about the kind of the logistics of responding to the disease, and then we'll move on to a couple in relation to the Saving Devon's Treescape project. So the final one is around advice regarding kind of coppicing of ash with the disease, and whether that's, you know, a potential management solution, or whether the high risk trees, you know, just should be removed as soon as they're identified.
If I take that one as two, then unfortunately, what happens when you coppice a tree is that the new growth is closer to the ground, and that's actually where the spore burden is highest. And so actually coppicing a tree may actually reduce its life rather than extend its life. And the same goes for pollarding, although that's slightly higher off the ground. And indeed, coppiced ash is, you know, you see it, it's just as prone to infection as uncoppiced ash, and pollards are dying as well, sadly. I wish there was something more positive I could say on that, but there isn't, I'm afraid.
No problem at all. And now one for you, Rosie, about the community tree nursery. And that's just a question about kind of how big an area is required to kind of cultivate all of these trees.
So it depends. So the area we have at Meath at the moment is around 40 by 20 metres. That's given us enough space to put in some compost bays, some raised beds, a polytunnel, a shed, lots of IBC tanks for water, and also lots of tables to do the work at. However, that is a large space, but it depends on how many trees you want to grow, really, and how efficient you are with your space. But yeah, that's a broad idea of what our Meath nursery is currently, but for the micro nurseries at schools, we'll literally just be looking at a raised bed or two to be planting them, so it can be as small or as big as you have space for.
And how many trees are you hoping to be able to grow at the Meath nursery?
We're hoping to do around 5,000 trees annually.
Very good. Excellent. So unless anyone has any final questions, then we will kind of wrap up. Oh, there seems to be Oliver's second question. Should potentially high-risk trees be removed as soon as the disease is identified? I think that's the question you're referring to. So that's another one for you, Rob.
Well, as I say, when they're in high-risk locations, then once they've lost 25 to 50% of the canopy, you probably should consider taking them down. Because if they're not infected at all, then don't do anything, because they could be some of these wonderful rare trees that are wholly resistant we want to keep above all else. But once they're showing clear signs of infection and they're starting to lose an appreciable part of the canopy, then the current advice is early rather than late in terms of taking them down.
That's great. Thank you very much. We are out of time. So I would just like to thank Rob and Rosie again for this afternoon's talk. And also thank you all for joining us today and for engaging in the conversation. And I hope to see some of you at the final talk on the 5th of October. I will be sending a follow-up email to everyone after this. So if anyone does have any further questions or would like any extra information, then please let me know. But other than that, thank you very much and goodbye.